Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, wherever you may be. I'm in Australia, as Peter alluded to, so it's evening for me here. Not sure if there's anyone over the pond in New Zealand. It'll be quite late for them, but yeah, thank you everyone for joining. So as Peter alluded to, my presentation, it's the first one. I'm kicking things off, so I'm sort of just trying to set the scene as best as I can for some of the things that we've obviously seen over the last 12 months since we did this event last year, which was right in the throes of lockdown and everything for us here in Australia. But yeah, sort of hopefully giving some good advice and some good tips of where we're going and what we're seeing from the market and obviously from our client base as well. Okay, so obviously, I'm not sure how many of you attended last year's session that I did. I tried to draw a parallel between running, and I spend a lot of time running these days, and I did a marathons versus sprints kind of analogy last year. So I'm sort of trying to continue that sporting theme. There's much debate about whether Formula One racing is actually a sport or not, but needless to say, here we've got the kind of this thing. Are we ready? Are we ready to do this? You know, is this a race? Of course, is the whole situation we're in now. We, you know, are we racing against things? So obviously, it's a new world. It's a new way of seeing things. But you know, we're out on the starting grid. We're seeing how we're going now. All right, so this is a slide that I've just put together to try to give a bit of the agenda for today. So it's certainly showing a few things about the sections I'm going to go through. If any of you are familiar with Formula One racing, they break a track up into sectors, usually 3, and you can sort of see that here. So I'm going to try to break the presentation today up into 3 parts. So we'll kick off with some sort of, you know, what just happened, you know, the starting grid side of things. I don't know if any of you recognize that track. That's actually the Albert Park track here in Melbourne, which was usually the first race of the season. It was actually cancelled last year at the last minute. All the drivers were here. Everyone was here. It was in March last year. It was cancelled, so it's been rescheduled now to be late November. So obviously, fingers crossed that'll be on this year. But anyway, the starting grid, what's just happened, we'll then kind of get into sector 1, where we'll look at some of the consequences of all that and, you know, technical debt and things like that. We'll explain. Sector 2 is then all about how we think we can help you get out of that, and that's, you know, road mapping fundamentally, and how you can use road mapping as a way to go ahead and go forward. And then, you know, the home straight, sector 3 is some of the really interesting value adds that I think we uniquely offer in the marketplace that really let you shine and hopefully let you finish in, you know, first place, pole position if it was a qualifying lap. Okay, so let's just move through now with the whole starting grid. And actually, I will just do a quick little sound check. Peter, is it okay? Is my audio okay? I just wanted to make sure before.
Yep, everything's fine, Tim.
Yeah, great. Okay, excellent. All right, so yeah, what just happened? You know, not unexpected in a Formula One race. Sometimes, you know, the drivers, you know, rush into the pits without any warning for the pit crew, and everyone scrambles to kind of, you know, deal with what's just been thrown, the curveball, and that's essentially what just happened to us all last year. And that was, you know, of course, the COVID pandemic. So we've sort of just dropped in a few little statistics here for you to sort of start to understand the scope of this problem. Now, these ones are particularly related to people. Okay, so obviously with all the lockdowns that we've all experienced around the world, and actually we're in lockdown again here in Melbourne where I am at the moment, a lot of the staff, of course, working from home, it's changed the way people think about work. So you can see in that chart on the left there's been some surveys done where they've looked at, you know, essentially, well, for all the people who've been working from home, what does that mean going forward? And you're seeing in most of the regions of the world that actually people would be pretty unhappy about going back to an on-site working model again. So this is obviously post-pandemic even. So, you know, even and so high, and you can see there the Australian column, you know, there's something like 16% are very unlikely to stay with that employer if they were forced to have to go back on site. You know, 26% likely to, you know, change jobs, right? So overall, that's a 30% number, though, that people that are, you know, kind of likely to actually, you know, hand in their pink slip if they're being told to go back to work. So that's an entirely different model. And if you look at the graphic on the right, that's a 20 only 5 points change. Before COVID, you had, the vast majority of people working, on site, in offices with, some portion flexible working, 30%, but, over 90% were certainly going into the office. And now you're looking at that completely turning on its head, right? So you're looking at only something like 37% now who actually would like to go back into the office. So we're really facing an entirely different pattern of work now, and that's probably here to stay. I mean, there's obviously a lot of debate about that, and we as a company as well, with all of our regions around the world, we've got different operating models now that we're using as well in the different regions about working from home or not. So yeah, every company is going to face that same challenge now going forward. And what does that mean from a technology point of view? Well, essentially, I don't want to over egg this, but there's definitely been a lot of pieces written about the importance of technology, and indeed the importance of the leaders, the IT leaders in organizations. Arguably, there's the top left quote there, Harvey Nash. It's a survey we'll sort of quote from a fair bit through this presentation, but basically it's all about how they surveyed hundreds of, actually thousands of CIOs and leaders like that. They've been doing it for 20 years. But yeah, close to two thirds of the leaders have said that they feel like their influence has increased. People are looking to the technologists in the company to help them. And you can even see with that quote down the bottom right there, which comes from Forbes, is the CIOs have arguably been come to the rescue. They are the superheroes. And I'm sure if you're familiar with some of our past presentations, we've talked about the superpowers that we have as EAs, and the what's your superpower and things like that. So we've got lots of sort of presentations that draw that metaphor. But yeah, ultimately the technologists are the ones who maybe are here and can save things. So what are the big trends we're seeing? Okay, so these are the IT trends. This is not specific to EA yet. This is just technology in general. So the IDG, they've talked about this concept of cloud foundation. It's been moving that way anyway, but that's had an afterburner put to it now, right? So this whole concept of supporting the work from home model of work now, of course, means everyone's sitting at their home office and logging into online apps and things like that. Sure, there's some VPN for some of the secure apps, but but largely it's all online with SSO and all the authentication done. So that's a fundamental trend that companies are seeing, and indeed it's just expanded even further. The second big trend is this phrase called the Great Dispersion. I don't know how many of you have heard of that, or dispersion. It's from Professor Scott Galloway. He's from NYU School of Business. Essentially, he's been writing for a number of years, and now, of course, it's really come to fruition about how the business models have changed over the last sort of 10, 20 years. So, Amazon was the classic disruptor that took retail through to the desktop now, and mobile and voice, with Alexa and things like that. So that whole business has changed. Retail is now not a face-to-face model anymore, and it's obviously all online. Netflix has done the same for movies. It used to be you'd go into your Blockbuster and rent your video, then it was DVDs would get posted to you, and now it's all just streamed. So we take that for granted now that that's the way it is, but these are big disruptions that have happened over the last sort of 10, 20 years. So this pandemic is going to bring some of the similar things, and there's obviously some opportunities now, but the whole work from home culture, that whole business is now going to be, obviously improved. And, there's a big dispersion now with the hybrid and remote work and, self-service things, telemedicine, remote learning for universities. So, the whole edutech sector is now going to really explode even further. They'd already been moving in that direction. So this whole great dispersion is just happening more and more. And the last one is it actually comes from the CIO magazine. It's this concept of what are being referred to as adversity centers. Okay, so these are essentially a CIO-led area in a business, and they talk about potentially 2/3 of organizations will have this as a dedicated center within the next 2 to 3 years, where it's really a crisis center, and its whole idea is to deal with these curveballs that get thrown our way, just like the pandemic last year. A lot of people are thinking this is the new normal, and so we're going to need the technology organization in a company to be actually prepared for this and have those triage centers ready to deal with this when a curveball comes our way. So they're the big mega trends for IT. When we look at it from a pure enterprise architecture point of view, what are the trends that we're seeing? And this is, of course, our sweet spot. So machine learning, more and more and more. I'll talk about that through this presentation. But how can you use machine learning to automate things and speed up things and make us more efficient and make us better architects? It's not replacing us. It's just a tool in our toolkit to make us better and make us faster, and hopefully give us some more value into the organization. The whole big theme around technical debt, and I'll talk about that a lot, that's now clearly something that's very important. 2020 has dumped a whole lot of debt on us by the rapid decisions we made. So that again is something that there's going to be a lot more work put into by all the different people. Cybersecurity, right? Of course, everyone's working from home now. What does that mean from all the security implications? There's a lot. I mean, there's various statistics out there. Again, Harvey Nash is a great source of some of these things, but they found that over the last year, the phishing attacks, malware, all that sort of stuff has increased because they know people are working. All these hackers, those people, they know everyone's at home. They know that the technology that they're using and the security around that is possibly a little bit diminished. And so they're really ripe for exploiting that. So, these things have gone up a lot in the last year. So cybersecurity, of course, now the whole work from home model is going to be, something that we need to put a lot more work into. And then finally, this whole, visibility and discoverability. I'm going to talk about making the invisible visible, but the idea that decision making and where all the different things live, where your debt is, all that different stuff just needs to be surfaced a lot more. And obviously, enterprise architecture has a key role to play in that. About, as I've said, make the invisible visible. Okay, so that's the starting grid. That's kind of, where hopefully that's all pretty sadly familiar to us all. That's what we're all having to deal with now from the last year. So what we're now looking at, though, and moving into sector one, as we're calling it, cornering the chimera. So I don't know if this is a term you guys have heard. I'm not sure what your backgrounds are, but this was something that I learned about. It's almost, it must be 25 years ago. It was mid-90s now. So a chimera it's a mythological Greek creature. That's a sculpture of it. Essentially, it was a hybrid animal. It's more or less, technically it's defined as something with two parts of two animals, and it actually exists. These things exist in nature. But needless to say, it was often depicted as like a lion's head, as you can see, with a goat protruding out of its back and a snake's tail. The point being here with a chimera is there's nothing that's blended here. It is really just a mashup, a Frankenstein of different things, where unfortunately there is nothing better about the combined animal than each of those individual animals themselves. So the cornering the chimera concept was this paper written by Jeff Dromey back in the 90s. And it was looking at how do you sort of assess the quality of systems and software. And it essentially what he argued, and it's proven to be true, was that a good process alone won't make good software or good systems. Okay, you need to be able to assess the actual product and the technology and things like that as well, the other aspects of it, rather than just a process. Now, he was arguing against the flawed processes that we're using back then, and that was the whole object-oriented world, and arguing that there needed to be better structured analysis, structured design, which of course was the cornerstone of what became architecture. So he was arguing that if you're just cobbling objects together like a chimera, you're not architecting at all. Okay, and so that was really the point of this, and that's what we've kind of possibly just inherited over the last year, is that we've inherited a whole lot of patched together things where you would be familiar with the architecture mantra, which is the whole, in this case, is not greater than the parts. Okay, it's not a Gestalt entity. So that's that's theory, but the idea of the chimera is it's no better than the pieces that we've just cobbled together, and indeed in many cases it's worse. So yeah, what's just happened? We've been thrown all of these, mad dash things, a lot of them overnight. Everyone's gone home. We need to, get them all connected. So some, panic stations for a year now. So ultimately, all these things we've had to deal with, and I'm proud of how we dealt with it as a company. I'm certainly, the feedback I've had from all of the different clients we've worked with is how well they've done it as a company as well. But there is unfortunately a lot of stuff to try and clean up now, and that's where we move into the topic of technical debt. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this. This is a framework that we've liked for a while. It's actually been out for close to 10 years now, actually. It's by Philippe Crutzen. I hope I pronounced his name right. Essentially, it's looking at, and you can see that kind of the magic quadrant on the top right there. One likes their Boston matrix, 2x2 grid. So what you're looking at is visible versus invisible, and then positive or negative value. Okay, so just a quick summary of this, you can probably see is visible things that have positive value are referred to as features. They're the things that you're intending to do and build, and obviously people see. So just like in Abacus, it's all the new features we release. Now, unfortunately, with any new release, like everywhere, is you have some visible negative things, which of course are referred to as bugs. And we're not immune to that, but we definitely minimize that as best as we can. So there's those two visible things: features versus bugs. Okay. Now, there is then behind the scenes a whole invisible world, okay, that goes towards, of course, debt. Now, things that are invisible but have a positive value, we, of course, would argue is architecture. There's other things there, culture and stuff like that, but certainly from a technical point of view, architecture is the thing that, largely stays behind the scenes as invisible, but it yields a lot of positive value into an organization. Then the dreaded elephant in the room is, the invisible things that have negative value, and that's referred to as technical debt. So like I say, that's a pretty good little framework to try to define these things. And I'll look into obviously what technical debt is more in detail, but seeing it like that, it's the invisible things that have negative value. Okay. So of course, what we're trying to do is make these invisible things visible. Okay, so that's actually it comes from a quote. There's Hillman Curtis was the founder of, or the kind of original designer of Flash stuff, 20 years ago. I know Flash is pretty much gone now, but certainly back then it was cutting edge. So he has a quote which is, "Your goal as an architect, the role of an architect, your goal is to listen, observe, understand, sympathize, empathize, synthesize, and glean insights that enable you to make the invisible visible." Okay, so that's a 20-year-old quote. There's ones from many, many years, which are Vitruvian Man. There's other ways that people have tried to define the role of the architect. But this one, the invisible visible, is a really important point here, because that's the role of an architect. If you remember that technical debt taxonomy, the top right quadrant, you're trying to use architecture to make things of value visible to people that they otherwise didn't know. We can use words like insight, and of course, Abacus is a great supporter of that. Trying to surface all these things through all the clickable dashboards you guys know. Bringing things to the stakeholders' attention when you need to, and fundamentally making the invisible visible. That's what a good architect does, and obviously what good architecture does. But bringing the invisible visible also brings things like technical debt visible. Okay, so there's this phrase, which is the politest way I can put it, which is, I hope you've got a pretty good mud jacket, because people are going to fling their mud at you. Okay, so you're possibly the bearer of bad news. As an architect, you're often having to, bring things up. Now that's supported in lots of different ways. One of the approaches we use is this one down here, where we talk about technical debt. It's using a concept of waivers. Now Abacus has lots of different frameworks, but one of them, it talks about waivers. Another term you might use for this is exceptions. The CIO or the CEO wants his BlackBerry, right? So basically, giving people waivers or exceptions, or as a lot of people in technology call it, the "I told you so" card. But bringing that to everyone's attention and saying, look, this is a simple example. It's just, there's only a single waiver here to try to illustrate it, but it's basically saying, look, somewhere along the way, a project was done, a waiver was issued against that project to use, in this case, what is it, Microsoft SQL Server 2005. This was all the way back in 2009. This waiver was issued. It was seen as the quick fix, so it was only going to cost, let's say, 10 grand. So that's your non-compliance cost. So, to be non-compliant, yep, fine, we'll give you an exception, but because it's only going to cost 10 grand to get this into the portfolio quickly. The alternative would have been to have spent 300 grand, right, to maybe use Oracle or some later version of SQL. Okay, and so that was where we decided, well, look, instead of spending 300 grand, we'll spend 10 grand. And then the technical debt, the hidden cost here is, well, what's it going to cost to fix that someday? And that's referred to as remediation. So someday we're going to have to suck it up and pay 500 grand, right? So we've got a significant debt that we're carrying now for when we do need to be compliant in the future. We can't just make it compliant with the 300 grand anymore. By going down this other path, it's going to cost more to rip it out and replace it than we could have done in the first place. But that's okay. The whole point here is technical debt can be made visible. And sadly, like I say, that means you're going to be the bearer of bad news, and I hope your mud jacket's pretty thick. So what does that mean? If we get onto your mud jacket as a skill that you need to have as an EA. So as Peter mentioned, we've had pretty close to 2,000 registrations for this. So early on in the piece, I know the team went out and surveyed people. What do you guys want to hear about? What are the topics that are of interest to you? So the pie chart on the left here was an interim survey we did of, I think, says 600, the first 600, I guess, registrations. About what topics they wanted. And you can see here that technical debt was popular, road mapping, that accounted for about half. So that's why I'm trying to cover these off. I'm trying to cover off each of these topics. You'll see I'll talk about integrations, I'll talk about cybersecurity, cloud, stuff like that. Trying to cover off these topics just a little bit at the start here. And then as Peter alluded to, there's focused presentations about each of these coming up over the next 2 days. So hopefully you got a copy of the agenda and you'll join in those sessions. And now, of course, you can watch them later as well. The graphic on the right here is from Gartner. It's actually, they did a survey of CIOs, pretty recent actually. Again, what are the things that you should be focusing on as architects? What are the skills that we need as architects? And again, you can see here that road mapping, that's the option D there, being able to do things, future state stuff is important, technical debt, decision making, all these things are likewise, they would concur with us that, this is the stuff we all need to understand better and be able to do better. So let's look at these and let's look at where the shortages are. So Harvey Nash, I talked about that survey it's been going for over 20 years now, several thousand CIOs all around the world. And essentially this is the stuff that we're seeing now. This was highlighted, as of course, things that we now need. This was done last year, end of last year, to cope with all this stuff. So these are the skills shortages that we all have. So again, cybersecurity, technical architecture, but of course, thankfully, right there and then, people are talking about we need more enterprise architects. We need more architects to, we would obviously argue, make the invisible visible and put some good bones into our company, because you can't just band-aid all this stuff forever. You're going to be taking on too much technical debt if you keep doing that. We need to take a step back and make this stuff better. So what does that mean? And needless to say, from an EA's point of view, just a couple of little shout outs here to how an EA as a people concept. We've talked about the skills that EAs need a lot, and we can give you those presentations specifically, but a bit of a summary here. Some of the skills that EAs really need, and some quick, in air quotes or inverted commas, I'd say tools and hacks that we've discovered that we all need. So, roadmaps, action agendas, specifically targeted for the stakeholders, and I'll talk about that. Short, sharp presentations. So this is hopefully one of those. Hopefully I don't go over time. And it's an interesting thing. So they've, I don't know how many, I'm sure you guys have done as many Zoom kind of things as I have over the last year. And we've all got Zoom fatigue, as it's called. So a lot of the psychologists have studied that actually it works better without the cameras on. So I know that's a bit strange, and obviously I haven't turned my camera on here, so thankfully you can't see my unshaven self. But it's one of those things that we found is as much as I'd like to, sometimes connect, face to face with people, albeit virtually. When there's complex topics like this going, it's been found that it's a fair bit of a distraction for the viewers, and it's a fair bit of pressure and added bearing on the presenter if you actually got cameras on. So needless to say, cameras off for this. What are some of the other tools? Well, clearly labeled visualizations are critical, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And you've heard that some of the presentations are specifically addressing that. How do you actually visualize things, communicate things to people? Because as much as a pie chart, there's some great Dilbert things about the humble pie, the pie chart. Written communication is often better than unspoken, better than spoken. So sometimes people need a report, need something they can poke at, even if it's live on a tablet. That's fine, rather than a verbose documentation. Being quantitative, so curating KPIs, key performance indicators that are relevant to the situation. And again, I'll talk about that a fair bit coming up. And we've got to upward manage. All of us have to do that. We've all got to talk in the language that people above us will understand, and help them, of course, make the decisions they need to make. So on that, of course, the top of the tree is the CEO, and the number one stakeholder we all have is the CEO, and they tend to focus on three things. And that's them: risk, cost, and growth. This is what I've seen time and time again over my career is, they're putting everything into those three buckets. How does this, and what is it going to cost me? What benefits it's going to bring, and what are the risks of choosing point A, option A versus option B. There's been some studies again here, Gartner's survey. So they did a CEO survey as well. There was the CIO one I talked about before. The CEO survey they did back end of last year. Lots of great results in there. I don't know if you guys got access to the Gartner stuff, but one of the things that they've tracked over time is the mention of the word digital. How much is digital increasing, and it's obviously over 20% now. People talking about digital business as a key thing that CEOs, so it's not CIOs, CEOs care about. So we, of course, are the ones who bring a digital business to their attention. The invisible, the visible, right? That whole thing. Okay, so let's take each of these in turn. So the action agendas and roadmaps. So again, a roadmap means many things to many people. We've presented a lot about this over the years. We certainly lead the market in the ability to have these multiple options and all this kind of stuff. Essentially, it's some concept of time. Okay, as a minimum, it's where do you want to be in the future? With some concept of time. Okay, so for example, you're currently let's say where you are. You're obviously not happy about where you are. You want to get to this beautiful future. This wonderful nirvana, this postcard from the future. But fundamentally, you need to explain why you want to be there. You need to put value around that and quantitative justification around that. And so that obviously proves that it's feasible. And then you have to prove it's reachable as well. And that's essentially what you do incrementally, how you get from point A to point B. And there might be lots of mistakes along the way, lots of branches along the way that were dead ends. Okay. But that fundamental, prove that the future is feasible. So it's possible, and prove that you as an organization can reach that. So it's reachable. You can get from where you are now to where you need to be. That's fundamentally what a roadmap is. Whether you do it again with Gantt charts, whether you do it with heat maps, whether you do it with options and trade-off analysis, there's lots of different techniques. We talk about 4 different types of roadmaps when we get into this. So again, dig out those presentations out. My colleagues can send them. One of the other big topics that everyone was concerned about, which not surprisingly is what's just happened with the last 12 months, is everyone's been band-aiding things together and quick hacking stuff together and rolling out things overnight. So APIs have been key, integrations between things, quickly wrestling 2 systems together, square pegs, round holes, fitting them together, trying to work out how we can get things done is a fundamental challenge that we're all now having to continue to do, and obviously clean up what the consequences of all that's been. So if you look at that, people talk about this as the API economy. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Postman. Many of you who've done any API work would know it. It's an environment where you basically test, you design and test any APIs you might be doing, any REST APIs. So we use it, of course. So this is some stuff that they've released. They talk about API collection. The collection is essentially a project within Postman world of different integration that's being done. So you can see there, just over the course of this was before 2020, from 2019 to January 2019 to January 2020, it doubled. You've gone from 17 million different integrations that they were helping people do to 35 million, in just 12 months. Now that's got even more. So certainly through the latest they've got is, we're talking about 46 million different collections now. So it hasn't doubled, it's gone up about 50%. There would have been a fair bit of a slowdown in the middle there, but essentially this stuff is just getting out of control. There is millions upon millions of integrations that people are having to wrestle with, and we're having to now work out what technical debt's associated with all that. A quick switch to Abacus. So Abacus, of course, advocates everything being integrated. The whole premise of having a repository is you've got your single source of truth, and then you're surfacing content through different visualizations. You maintain it in one catalog, let's say, a list of things. Any change you do there is instantly reflected in any diagram you might have, and vice versa. You might filter things and say, look, give me a look, in this case, at all the things I'm trying to retain. So as soon as you say that, the diagrams will down select. You can see some of the boxes disappear. So this is, Abacus, essentially is everything integrated together, regardless of what view you might be using. There's a repository behind the scenes. Elements only exist once in the repository. We call them components. Now, connections are also elements, and so the relationships between things. So integrations or APIs are connections. They're connections between 2 things, interfaces between things. So these can be managed just like any other object. The integrations between things, and all of that is a list. It's just got a start and an end, like a connection does. But they are fundamentally things that we can, of course, surface and then manage just like anything else, being a whole integrated platform. The second part to it is essentially trying to make this easy and automating things. So the little animation we've got here in the top right is essentially some auto layout stuff. So you can simply pull in content from somewhere like a spreadsheet or a configuration management database. So some list value you've got, SharePoint, we've got all these different adapters I'll sort of talk through, but you can pull in a lot of content very quickly. Then you can generate views of that. So you can generate diagrams instantly in Abacus of the connected content, and then you can lay it out in whatever different algorithms you like, whether you want circular or orthogonal or hierarchical. There's lots of different layout algorithms you can use. So you can produce a whole lot of insight and a lot of visibility of your organization from things that were living in big data warehouses before, and no one ever saw. You can see this visually. We are visual creatures as humans. We think in 2 and 3 dimensions, so we like to see things connected. And a good architect, you'll see them waving their hands around about how things are connected to each other. So speeding that up and making these integrations visible instantly in things like diagrams and matrices and stuff like that is a key thing we need to be delivering going forward. So let's have a quick look at one of these key integrations we've seen a lot of people using, and that's our ServiceNow integrations. So we have an adapter out of the box with ServiceNow. You essentially just connect to your site, put in your credentials, you create mappings. So they're essentially just mapping the objects that exist in the ServiceNow instance you have with the components that you have in your Abacus repository and the connections. So we're agnostic about those things. People can configure their ServiceNow repository how they like. They can configure their Abacus repository how they like. And the two, of course, can then be mapped to each other. So those mappings exist as in Abacus, we maintain the third-party ID. So we maintain the ServiceNow ID. So we use that. We don't create some dummy ID in Abacus that you have to maintain. Essentially, as you maintain things in ServiceNow, whether you add an element, remove an element, that's all detected in Abacus, and we can do all that automatically without you having to do anything. And the last thing, of course, is set up some schedule and then forget about it. So, whether it's every day, pull the content in from ServiceNow and pull in all the deltas that have happened, and you can have alerts telling you what's changed and all that sort of stuff. But that's a very easy, low-hanging fruit. Just suck in all the content you've got in some structured data repositories like a CMDB, and then visualize things using those diagrams. We've had a lot of people get some quick wins doing that. Another one of our integrations that we have that we recommend everyone uses is our Technopedia integration. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Technopedia, but it has literally millions of standards being maintained. They keep properties around those standards, so like the end of life dates, the costs of them, the various risk metrics. You can see here that we're kind of finding a specific Oracle instance that we want, Oracle DB, and there's, like I say, literally millions of these things. So you can connect to these standards in Technopedia. So let's say you pull your content from ServiceNow, you then map all of the different standards with Technopedia, and then again, set and forget. That stuff is just continually maintained, and as things change, end of life dates change, these alerts all can be happening. So use all this stuff as quickly as you can to just pull all this chimera together, right? Pull it all together, surface all this stuff, and find very quickly where you've got all your issues and all your technical debt. We, of course, have an API. Abacus has a REST API. So this is just some of the examples. I won't go into this too much, but it's obviously using Postman, like I talked about before. So you can put Abacus into a federated set of tools. So it's pretty common that we'll see Abacus integrated with other tools in a client's portfolio. The CMDB, like we've talked about, things like that. But you can be pulling content and pushing content with Abacus. Okay, so you don't need to necessarily even use Abacus's UI to do that. You can be automatically pushing stuff into the Abacus repository. It's no problem there. So we're one of those collections in the 47 million or whatever it is that Postman now have. So that's fine, and our customers are developing those all the time. Okay, let's jump into sector 2. So we've sort of, the first sector was all about, some tactical things that we can do to really get on top of this chimera, obviously deal with technical debt and deal with the integrations and things like that. So, obviously keep the, dare I say, the wolves at bay, but, keep the lions at bay. Sector 2 is all about road mapping. This is all where we've, really carved a huge amount of expertise over the last 20 years. So sometimes technology, though, is a bit difficult to predict. So these two little headlines here, I'm sure you can see those. So Uber CEO back in 2014 was saying, self-driving cars are the future, drivers are not. And I'm sure lots of us have followed that and how all the different things played out there. Lifts, said, majority of rides will be self-driving cars by 2021. Okay, it's 2021, it's not happening. I don't think we can blame COVID for that. I don't know how many of you have seen Back to the Future, but the the year that was in there was about present time. So things don't go necessarily as they plan. How did those things turn out? Well, they both failed. So Uber's now sold it off, divested their whole self-driving car project. Lyft is now divested it to Toyota. So neither of these things played out. Not all technology plays out how you think it's going to. So roadmaps are fraught with potentially being wrong. But sometimes we do pretty well. So I don't know how many of you remember a year ago, we didn't have vaccines. People were talking about this is going to take 10 years. Traditionally, it takes over 10 years to bring a vaccine to market. Okay, this was New York Times, back in April last year, so only a bit over a year ago, saying, look, we're not going to have a vaccine until 2032. This is, obviously we know that's not the reality. The reality is something far more wonderful. As I think, actually, it's in the last week, the US is now over 50% of the population's vaccinated. So I think it's over 60% of the eligible population, which is 12s and over. The UK's the same. It's just incredible, how fast these things are going. Here in Australia, we're a little bit behind, unfortunately. I've had my first dose. A couple of months' time, I'll get my second dose. But it's pretty impressive. In less than a year, we've got to the stage of having vaccines, and indeed in countries like America, having half the people vaccinated. So sometimes we underpromise and overdeliver. Sometimes we overpromise and underdeliver when it comes to roadmaps. Fundamentally, though, use numbers. So Abacus here, this is showing a quick little example of side by side, a diff analysis between a current state and a potential future state. As I mentioned, Abacus is unique in the market. It has multiple discrete states you can model. Each of them are discrete architectures. You can have different teams working in each architecture, project teams working in one architecture, and business as usual baseline teams working in another. And at any moment in time, you can do a diff or a trade-off between them, use metrics to do that. So there's a whole lot of methodologies out there that we've pioneered around that. And this simple example you can see here, the left side is showing an on-premise, the right side a cloud option. So, if you look at some of those numbers, right, the cloud option is more available, less complex, cheaper. Now, while the response time might be a bit high, the customer experience is actually better. So, these things are trade-offs. You can't necessarily have everything, but fundamentally there's priorities here. And, we can talk all about that, of how you decide on your KPIs, and I'll get into that soon. But basically these all have weightings, and there's different ways you can trade off KPIs against each other. But, fundamentally you can use Abacus to quantitatively trade off different future states and different options. This is another sample dashboard. It's a retail banking example where an organization was wanting to change their architecture from a retail. This could have been, to move more online, the whole model that Amazon, of course, pioneered. Fundamentally, there's different ways. And the important thing is, make dashboards that are relevant to the stakeholders you're trying to communicate with. And I'll talk a lot about that. But at a more primitive or a more fundamental level, and again, these are some Dromey quotes, classic metrics quotes is, what gets measured gets managed. You can't improve what you don't measure. Okay, so that's measurement 101, is come up with some metric and then try to work out how to improve it, with all of the confidence and all the disclaimers that you might want to use around that. Just one last one. I won't spend too much time on this, but you can get pretty advanced with Abacus. Abacus has algorithms that can do some pretty amazing things. Our customers are building algorithms all the time. So you can be doing some SLA performances and integrations, APIs, all this kind of good stuff with some pretty amazing discrete event simulations and Monte Carlo simulations. You can get really advanced over time. It was what my PhD was in 20 years ago. So this stuff's pretty amazing if you go down the rabbit hole a bit. Okay, so let's, not to go down the rabbit hole, let's think about how KPIs should be done that are relevant to people. Okay, so there's been my colleagues have done some great presentations on how do you come up with KPIs. There's methodologies that we can show you. It's a quick summary of a slide deck that we can give you that was done last year. Essentially, there's lots of different types of KPIs. Okay, you can see in the table with the orange header there, there's, sort of strategic ones, operational ones, analytical ones, technical ones, all these different things like, cost metrics, numbers, just quantities. Even, you're talking about reuse and sharing, how many, business departments use, the same, API or the same application to deliver a service. These are pretty important KPIs that you can get. And then, the blue-headed table there is really talking about in different domains. If you care about application optimization or security optimization, there's metrics that, of course, focus on those. And there's, you'll hear about them as non-functional requirements or ilities. There's all different areas you can be measuring those things. But, fundamentally think about what is the question you're trying to answer. So, like in the top right there, is cost, something we care about, and where is this cost in our business? So of course the KPI is going to be some total cost of ownership, and the visualization might be a tree map, showing where cost is, the size being the relative value and maybe the color being the rate of change. If it's a when question, we've talked about road mapping, when questions might just be, when is something getting decommissioned? A Gantt chart's going to be perfect for that sort of thing. It doesn't show you why or how, but it certainly shows you when. Okay, so this is important. Think about what, of course, is the way to answer the questions you're being asked. And again, the methodology that we can spend a lot of time talking about, but I'll just quickly summarize here. There's kind of 6 parts to it. So of course, think about the goal, the question you're trying to ask. So let's say it's reduce IT costs. Okay, who's asking that? What's the stakeholder group? This could be the C-level executives. So this is in IEEE terms, we contributed to all the IEEE standards on this stuff. So you're talking about stakeholders, they have concerns. You communicate those concerns through viewpoints. Okay, so you elaborate them now into questions. So what are the current costs? What are the future costs? Whose costs are they? Where are they? How are they changing over time? You elaborate the concern into questions that are relevant that we can answer. You map those to metrics that will actually address each of those questions. So it's not just TCO. There might be some other time ones and things like that. You then might need to use different techniques or algorithms, approaches to produce those metrics. These aren't just manual. There can be formulas that you use. There can be simulations you do. So you work out how do we actually get these metrics for these questions we have. And then, of course, how do we present the results of these different analysis pieces to those stakeholders so that they will hopefully be able to make a decision. It might just be a pie chart. Could be a Gantt chart, could be a matrix, could just be a list. Who knows? There's lots of different ways to do this, but essentially that's the method that you want to follow. All right, let's move into the last sector, basically the home stretch. Let's I don't know if you guys know, in Formula One racing, they talk about purple. Like when you look at the timing screens, the fastest car in an individual sector gets purple. And so we're showing purple in sector 1 and sector 2. Let's bring it home in sector 3 and see if we can make it first across the line, or get in pole position. So this stuff, hopefully I haven't scared you off with some of those terms like discrete event simulation, Monte Carlo. This stuff is not as complicated as you might think. We've been doing this for 20 years. We've been making this stuff as usable as certainly is possible. But you still need to automate all this stuff. You've talked about set and forget for the different integrations. It's the same when it comes to the different algorithms, right? You set the algorithms up, and I'll talk about how you can no code those. You don't have to write code at all. It's all block based. But you set the algorithms up and you forget about them, and they're just running constantly in the background, okay, and producing metrics. As someone changes something, the algorithm triggers and it recalculates whatever you need. Okay, so this stuff is live. It's I would call it near real time, because some of the algorithms do take a bit of time to run sometimes. But fundamentally, automate this as best as you can. If it's a financial analysis piece, of course, our TCO algorithms, they all just run behind the scenes, and they can produce numbers that you can just be looking at. This is a finance dashboard here with some cool approaches: chord diagrams, tree maps, sunbursts, partition charts. We've got all these things at our disposal to visualize and communicate to the stakeholders that you need to communicate with. So if we look at then the way that you do this fundamentally, and we presented all on this, and there's going to be more presentations in this summit about how you no code these things. So again, hopefully everyone understands that term and are familiar with that. It's all block based. If you guys aren't familiar with it, I can show you your kids are. There's a great platform called Scratch that all the kids these days are using to no code programs. They don't have to write code anymore. So we apply that. We use a whole block-based approach built on top of Microsoft Flow in Abacus to be able to compose algorithms. So we call it a visual algorithm composer. Okay, so you're not coding, you're just composing algorithms by joining up blocks and obviously doing different calculations, triggering different things. Who knows? It's all pretty incredible, pretty powerful stuff, and it's in your hands. Most of the research has showed that If people have the ability to edit an existing algorithm, they build a lot more confidence in that algorithm. So we ship the product out of the box with loads of no-code applications, no-code algorithms. Our community's got algorithms in it. You can download them and apply them to your own repository. Our community members are contributing algorithms. So, this stuff, take it, make it your own, tweak it, and then build your confidence in what the algorithm doing. We don't black box this stuff. We try to be as transparent as we can. Remember, make the invisible visible. There's no need to hide behind this stuff. We provide a platform. Abacus is an architecture-based analysis of complex systems platform to be able to do this stuff. The content is your own, and we'll give you that as best as we can. Don't be afraid of machine learning. So Abacus has machine learning built into it in lots of different places, from simple natural language processing to be able to, detect when you're, typing things in that you've already got, so you don't duplicate content. A smart search feature we have, through to some autocomplete things. So this little animation you can see here on the right is showing, let's say you've just pulled a whole lot of content in from a spreadsheet, or you pulled it in from ServiceNow or something like that. There's some blanks in there. Abacus has the ability to detect patterns in your data. Okay, so for example, you might have an application that's providing an HR service to, let's say, the Australian departments, and it's managed by a person, John Smith. So when you add another record into the repository that's an HR system servicing Australia, we can probably determine that it's actually going to be managed by John Smith as well. Okay, so it's finding those patterns in the data and filling in the blanks. Okay, so an incredibly powerful thing to start with. It's obviously we call it autocomplete. It's you've got it straight away. Just it's called the Ask Abacus feature. If any of you have been playing with it, you'll know what I mean. And then, it highlights the cell. It doesn't fill it in for you automatically. We're still jury's out on whether we should autofill some of this stuff, but at the moment we still make it a guided thing. We give the tool to the architects, and it's up to them to right click and go accept. So you can accept any of these recommendations, but they are actually just a suggestion to start with. We're very pedantic about using that. It's just a suggestion. You as an architect still make the decision about whether you want to use that or not. But fundamentally, Abacus can provide that, and it provides confidence intervals. It says, look, we're 70% confident that you should, this is John Smith's application, and so you can accept that or not. Taking that to a pretty incredible next step is certainly what we're already doing with our clients, and what we've been putting a lot of work into and will continue to put work into, is using machine learning to actually make decisions for you and guide the decisions that you're making. So, it should be obvious, a pretty simple example here, where you're looking at basically the disaster recovery level for an application. So at the moment, we don't know what it is, but what we do know is the application has only got a level 1 criticality out of 5. Okay. What happens if we change that criticality level to, let's say, a 3? Okay, so you change it in a catalog. Well, Abacus is now going to say, well, actually, we think, so before it was bronze, now we think actually maybe it's silver. So it's not a straight deterministic algorithm. This is a pattern that Abacus is detecting that there is obviously some strong correlation between the criticality and the disaster recovery you need, but it's not a simple one-to-one. You can't just have a deterministic formula that says, if criticality equals 1, DR equals bronze, right? Because there's going to be some other factors. And then this is where, again, I could talk about this for hours, but the quick summary is Abacus leverages the graph that is under the covers here. It looks at the whole graph when it understands the patterns of data that you've got. So the attributes, of course, that you might have against an application, but the things the application is connected to, okay, the things those things are connected to, the whole structure underlying your individual element you're looking at informs the algorithms that are being done behind the scenes with the machine learning that we have. And it will then start to suggest for you things where you've already filled them in. So it's not filling in blanks anymore necessarily. It's starting to detect where we're making things that we think, I think you might be wrong here. Remember the invisible visible, right? It might start to say, look, we don't think this should be bronze. We think this should be silver. Now that's just a simple one when we're talking about a DR level. What if it's the recommendation for the application? Right? So that we all know different techniques like time, tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate. We have algorithms for those that are deterministic, okay, where you look at different factors for business fit, technical fit, but we've also got algorithms that are machine learned, where organizations are saying, look, we want to retire this application fine, we believe you. Abacus believes you. And over time, it learns that, okay, there's criteria behind the scenes here that these users are using to make the decision to retire. We're not going to deterministically create a formula for that. We're going to just start suggesting that, hey, look, we think these applications should be being retired according to the logic that we've been detecting behind the scenes using our machine learning algorithms. So it's pretty impressive stuff. And again, I get very excited about it. It's certainly what we've been working to for 20 years, is this ability to guide what we do as architects and put a lot more science behind what we do, and take away the qualitative and make it quantitative. I need to, I'm just keeping an eye on time here. I know I've got about 5 minutes to go, so I'll just quickly get through the next few slides, and hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. So yeah, ultimately the methodology we're talking about here is essentially a guided one. So I don't want you to feel like this is, Skynet taking over the world. It is just a guided one for the architects. It's, a hybrid approach. So it's a blend of deterministic and non-deterministic algorithms. Again, I could spend hours talking about that, but it's a hybrid AI approach. And it's ultimately about optimizations. So you discover your current state. Remember, you elaborate on where you are now, think of the KPIs you care about. You fundamentally model that. That's what Abacus is for. It builds the models and the repository. It gets populated. You analyze that, use all the algorithms that we have at our disposal, and you can code, and no code. But then look at whether that option you've just done, you've changed something. Is it acceptable? Is that future state what you want to have? So this is a classic feedback loop. And what you're trying to do is understand what the different options are you've got going ahead, and which one is, of course, feasible to start with. And then, of course, the iterations around this loop tells you that it's reachable as well. Now, you layer on top of that the knowledge we have as architects, okay? And we're doing lots of work with our partners to codify this knowledge. So there's a whole lot of, I won't go into too much. There's a whole lot of ways you can codify knowledge, which actually can even guide the adaptations you try and take in an architecture. So whether you look at, outsourcing, whether you look at, rationalizing, all these things can be defined as graph transformations. And anyway, there's a whole lot of cool stuff there that we're working on, and we'll release over time. But fundamentally, once you're happy with what you've got, you can start to obviously put out your project plans and your target operating model. So you iterate around this feedback loop with guidance from the different algorithms we have, deterministic and non-deterministic, and try to code and encode the knowledge that we're using to do that. A quick little example, I don't have too much time, but we presented on this before, so I can certainly send you presentations. If we look at a simple trade-off between profit and customer satisfaction, we'd obviously like to optimize both of those, so have better profit and better customer satisfaction. So let's say we're down here, bottom left, so we're not as profitable as we'd like, we don't have as satisfied customers as we like, that's our current state. We might apply some transformations that come up with a different operating model, 1.1, make some more transformations, and ultimately get to some potential target operating model up here, which is clearly good for profit, and it's only increased customer satisfaction a bit. Still good, better than where we are now. So that's a good option, a good set of states we could go through, and arguably a roadmap we could do. But there might be a different set of options here, which are really focused on customer satisfaction, which gives us a different operating model, target operating model too. We're going to have to choose. You can't have both, right? Or can you? Can you have something that's a hybrid of both of these things? And that's fundamentally what Abacus lets you do, is play in these sandboxes, these future state architectures, play in those sandboxes and try to design a beautiful future that you think is going to be good for all the different KPIs you care about, and absolutely determine whether it is good for all those different KPIs. And of course, if you do that, I can assure you, you're going to be purple in sector 3, and you're going to be, P1. You'll be the most valuable employee in your company. There's no doubt about it. That's what architects have the power to be able to do, is bring this stuff to the top table, make that invisible visible, and show with quantitative confidence, albeit with confidence intervals, and talking about, how confident you are, what we think is the possible future for all of our organizations. With that, I'll give you a quick heads up on what our actual roadmap is as well. There's a lot of stuff I could talk about with this, and obviously talk to your account managers about this, what's coming out. We've got roadmap documents we can give you for the Abacus product suite. But just a quick heads up, some of the things we've already released here, we've already released some of those things on the left there, the configurable catalogs and stuff like that, but we're continuing to improve performance. We've got a big back-end change coming in the next couple of months that'll really make things really fly. More and more work on workflows and notifications, that stuff. We embed already in Teams and things like that. So we're doing things that'll hopefully work more hand in hand with collaboration environments like Microsoft Teams. We're all working in those environments now. More web-based diagramming stuff. So you've already seen, some of the cool things that we've done, but there's more stuff coming there, and we'll be doing a big refresh UX UI. We've got dedicated resources working on that now. So hundreds of things that we're working on. And again, talk to your account managers to get the full list of what we're doing. We've got some documents we can share with you. Okay, with that, I'll throw back to Peter. Hopefully I've kept to time. I can see that I've got sort of 2 minutes. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully, there's some questions there. We can take all these offline as well. We'll try and reply to them offline. Any ones we don't get a chance to do. But yeah, Peter, do you want to?
Yeah, indeed. Well, firstly, Tim, thanks very much. That was great, fantastic, as educational as ever. Learned a lot about F1 and Greek mythology there, so that was really quite something. Alongside everything else. Yeah, we did get some questions in. Look, it may just be that we can pick on just one or two of those.
Okay, sorry. Yep.
The first one was interesting, actually, and it follows on from one of the last topics you covered, and that's will the machine learning feature work on any projects with any model notation, or just with the specific criticality and DR values that were shown?
Yeah, great question. And absolutely 100% yes, it works on any repository. We've had to design Abacus from the ground up to be completely agnostic to what content people put in their repository, indeed, whether they even have applications. Okay, so Abacus is sympathetic to whatever way you want to design things. So that's the first thing. So the machine learning side of things, which is called Ask Abacus, that's the feature. It works with whatever repository you have, with whatever fields you have. The caveat I give there is you do need to have a certain volume of content, and that is settable by you as a user. I think the default is 10. So it won't trigger and include a collection in the training set until you've got at least 10 of them. Now, the reason we do that is because less than 10, it's just pretty, like if you've only got 5 applications, it's pretty hard to deduce anything from that. So it's settable. So we've certainly set it as a default of 10, but yeah, it can be 10 of anything. We don't care whether it's, applications or servers. We don't care what properties they have. So every property is included. There's no limitation to that. You can see why this runs on the enterprise. We have a whole analytics engine that runs behind the scenes. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with that. But yeah, there's a very heavy computationally robust analytics engine that runs the machine learning training set, and it gets retrained continually. I think you can set that on a schedule as well. So yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I could talk about that for hours too.
That was good. Thank you for that, Tim. That was great. Yep. Actually, a question that had come in on the chat right at the very beginning had asked about what you were actually showing, which application. And indeed, I think that was answered by one of our colleagues to say it was Abacus Enterprise, which even for some of our customers still may be something that they haven't seen in full. So that got an airing, I think, with some of the slides you were using.
Okay, so look, I'll give the quick summary there. We're sort of out of time. So there's 2 sides to the portfolio. There's what's called Abacus Studio, and there's Abacus Enterprise. Abacus Studio is the power user tool. It's where you do the heavy lifting. It's where you configure the meta model. It's where you configure the adapters. It's where you set up, different, kind of back end things, right? You do bulk uploads and stuff like that. So think of it as the power user tool. Abacus Enterprise is the everyone user tool, including the power users. Abacus Enterprise is where you do all of the modeling. It's where you do all of the data editing. You change all the values in the catalogs. It's where you make dashboards with pie charts and all that good stuff. So you can, it's permission based. So not everyone can necessarily do everything. Otherwise you have a bit of anarchy. But fundamentally, it's where the vast majority of users work, is in Abacus Enterprise. It's a native dedicated web app that works on all your tablets and things like that. And it's where we're putting a lot of our UX work into, because there's a 10 to 20 to 100 times more eyes on the enterprise screen than there is on the studio. Studio still has its place. It's the tool that we started with 20 years ago, and it's evolved and evolved. But it's fundamentally a power user tool, whereas Abacus Enterprise is like I say, the architects should be using Abacus Enterprise. Or your business users should be using Abacus Enterprise. So yeah, that's I guess the quickest way I can summarize it.
That's perfect. Thank you, Tim, for that.